Okay, you are now listening to Fiddlin' Big Al's Old Time Liberal Revival and Barn Dance. But now, before we start off with the normal theme song we use here, let me tell you what's coming up. We have Patricia Glazebrook, who is a philosophy person from WSU. Are you a professor or?
I am.
All right, we've got a philosophy professor here, and that's dear to my heart. I studied philosophy as an alternative to being not as smart as I am. You got to polish your own star sometimes. We're going to play this song from, this is an Argentinian reggae artist, Dred Marai, along with his friend Luciano, who is from Jamaica, and this is called Only Love Can Save Us Now.
Dear passengers, welcome to Jamaica.
Luciano, way now, he did my eye. Oh, no, no. Hey, hey, only love, oh, tan solo amor will help us when we love ourselves and the unity of mankind will save us in this time. Only love, oh, tan solo amor will help us when we love ourselves and the unity of mankind will save us in this time. Say they try to separate us 'cause they want us to fight amongst ourselves. They try to control our lives and treat us just like slaves. Only love, oh, tan solo amor will help us when we love ourselves and the unity of mankind will save us in this time. Only love, yeah, only love, only love, only love, love, love. Only love will save us in this time. Hoy muy claro y muy consciente que manejan el presente, pero el hombre que vive con fe, libre el alma y libre la mente. Only love, oh, tan solo amor will help us when we love ourselves and the unity of mankind will save us in this time. Only love, oh, tan solo amor will help us when we love ourselves and the unity of mankind will save us in this time. Only love, only love, ah, yeah. I say only love can save us when we work together like brothers and sisters, hermanos, hermanas, working hands and heart to achieve our goal, moving for the future. Yeah, yeah, Lord God. I say only love can save us, only love can heal us, working as one brother, hermanos, hermanas, working to achieve our goal, achieve our goals tonight. Only love, only love, 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 only love, 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 only love, 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 only love, 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 only love, love, love. Love, 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 only love, yeah. Only love, 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 yeah. Only love, love, love. Generations coming after. Learn. Oh, they learn what they give. Yeah.
And I was Dread Mara and Luciano with Only Love Can Save Us Now, but we don't want this next one, so we'll just fade it out. All right, we're here in the studio with Patricia Glazebrook and Rhea Davis, and we're going to be talking about, well, looming disaster, peace, war, insanity, climate, everything that pertains to the dysfunctional situation we have here. We have a leader whose military doesn't trust him. We have a Congress that doesn't trust their own conscience and want to follow. Well, who knows? They have something, but you can stifle. Maybe their consciences were strangled, like Jeffrey Epstein. They're certainly imprisoned in the Republican Party and in the cushy lifestyle that goes along with being a politician in Washington, D.C. You become addicted to that, and you don't want to lose, so you're constantly running, you're constantly kowtowing to whoever has the money, and I think that's the problem. Tell us about your background. I read a recent thing that you wrote. I don't know how recent it is, about the ethics of drone warfare. Maybe we could start there, but you tell us what you do, where you come from, and.
It was published actually on November 4th by New Statesman, which is...
Wait a second. Well, go ahead. Talk.
That was published on November 4th of 2019 by New Statesman, which is a British political newspaper read throughout the world. So it's fairly recent, and ironically and sadly, the closing line of that piece is, that war may be closer than we think. And it was less than 2 months ago that was published. And here we find ourselves now. So, where we are now. So my background is basically I was trained as a philosopher. I moved quite quickly into environmental philosophy and environmental ethics, but I also became through climate issues, actually, because the environmental stuff took me to climate questions. So I work with women farmers in northern Ghana on climate impacts and their adaptation strategies, and I go to the UNFCCC every year. I've done that since 2010. So I, on the one hand, have international policy, and on the other hand, I'm working on the ground with people who are being very strongly affected because they rely entirely on their crop to feed their family, and their food security is breaking down. So in the area where I work, there's only 30% of the people have no food more than once throughout a year. For at least a 24-hour period. So some of them will go for longer than that, and it could be once a week. So there's a critical situation going on in Africa. But I was invited through a book I wrote a long time ago about philosophy of science. I was invited to Austria to give a discussion, to host a discussion of this book, and hanging out with Austrians who like to, in the evening, go and sit in the pub and have a beer and talk about things as much as, that's really why I became a philosopher. So that I
for the beer?
That.
Okay.
Well, and also it's the only job you can mostly do while you're lying in bed that's legal. So I
Descartes invented the calculus lying in bed with
exactly.
gout.
Exactly. So we were talking in one of these conversations, and I dropped a comment about the connection. So they were actually military ethicists who, for some reason, had invited me to come and talk about this book on science. So I just dropped this throwaway line about, well, of course, that's a climate issue. And they said, what? Is there a connection between climate and conflict and climate and war? And I just went, of course there is. And so they invited me back to a conference in military ethics to talk about that. And then they asked me to come back and talk about gender in the military. And basically for about 8 years now, I've been going there 1, 2, or 3 times a year to talk about different issues in military ethics. I've also done that in Russia and in other countries. So I've learned a lot about war is a weird thing because from my perspective, all war is evil. I used to run an organization as a graduate student called Philosophers for Peace. Bit idealistic, I know, but you got to shoot high to get any distance at all. And so I don't support war in any way, yet at the same time I understand that there are ways to conduct war that are better, and there are ways to conduct wars that are worse. And right now we're in a situation where it's one of the worst. So there's a thing called just war theory, and in just war theory there are conditions that make it acceptable to go to a war. That's called jus ad bellum. And right now what has happened with Iran, we do not meet those conditions. So the conditions are that you have to be defending your country, etc. And there's no reason.
I think we got off the track of that a long time ago.
Well, yeah. But there was no reason to launch this drone strike, and also to take out an Iranian military leader in a country that is not Iran.
In an airport.
In an airport. That was a very vulnerable place for him to be, and other people were killed. So it breaks the just war theory requirement of specificity. You have to be clear that the person that you are targeting is the person who is, a military person and is a justifiable target. And so the other people who died as collateral damage, that's a breach, of ethics. And it just goes on from there, so I'm sure we'll talk about some of those details more. But this is not an assault that was justified as in terms of what it means to go to war. And so I think there's going to be a lot of criticisms coming in, from that direction. So that's who I am and why I do what I do.
That sounds like a pretty deeply rooted reason. Yeah. Well, I was a conscientious objector back in the Nam era, and I wrote them a piece explaining why I was not going to kill anyone for any reason at any time. And I got lucky that day. Maybe unbeknownst to me, there was an old lawyer whose name was also Al, who was on that draft board, and I had been on a church bowling team with him once. So they said, "Oh, you understand? You know this man." "Yes, Al's always been a good religious boy." And they gave me the 1AO classification. And when I left, the clerk of the draft board was aghast. That was the second one of those they had given out that day. He says, "This never happens." But people were waking up and speaking up and looking in their hearts about how they stood with war. Of course, the those that hadn't been on a bowling team with a draft board member might have not had it as easy. Many of them became Canadians. I have some friends who became Canadians. I have some friends who were Vietnam War vets who became Canadians after the war because they couldn't stand what was continuing to go on down here.
Yeah, I know philosophers in Canada who left the States at that time for that reason. And I guess, how should I put it? Did you exchange a walk-on pod in a war for a lead role in a cage?
Yeah.
That's Pink Floyd. Wish You Were Here.
Yeah. Well, I worked in a hospital for 2 years in Chicago. And during that time, I figured out I was going to be working for stupid people my whole life, so I decided that I would be self-employed. I was the stupid person I knew the best. But now I'm doing radio. And incidentally, the number, if anybody wants to call in and weigh in on this, we're hoping to, my friend Rhea Davis, who's here, texted me the other day. Say hello to the folks there. Come on now.
Hello, everybody out there.
Get closer to that microphone. You know better than that.
Hello, everybody out there in Moscow or wherever you're listening from. And thank you for listening in. I hope to ask all of you or any of you to please call today your representatives at 202-224-3121, and let's get a fair Senate trial and witnesses so we can get that guy in the White House out, removed, and convicted, hopefully. It could happen. And maybe we can end this threat of a war and have no more wars. That's my platform. That's why I'm here.
Okay.
And even if you're not old enough to vote now, so you think that you don't have a voice, you can make that call and you can say, I am 16 or I am 17. And you can say, it is this long until I will be a voter and these are the issues that matter to me. Because they need to know that you will be active in politics at the absolute first moment that you have opportunity, because that is your strength.
And
And
this is the only planet we have, so let's protect it.
and it's your future that you'll be speaking up for. And
Absolutely.
so, whose number was that? Is that
That
for,
is to Washington,
Get closer.
D.C. That is to Washington, D.C., and if you don't know your representatives, they will direct you to which representative you need to speak to directly, what state you're affiliated to, and that is the main number for D.C.
Well, here we are sitting in Idaho, and I know the representatives are James Risch and Mike Crapo. I know how you like to pronounce that one, yeah, and it's fair game. Back a couple of years ago, when things were heating up, we had the Lewis and Clark Valley indivisible group that would camp out trying to ambush the legislators. And in fact, we had Raul Labrador down there, and they saw us coming, so they decided to lock the office and go to lunch. So citizen activism, we got to take it to the streets, and we already have been taking it to the streets here in Moscow in Friendship Square on Fridays. Here's it. Let me read this thing here. There we go. Okay, this is the public service announcement that we read profusely here. It says, "Please join the Palouse Peace Coalition in a peace vigil every Friday afternoon from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Friendship Square in Moscow." It says, "We have been gathering here since November 2001 as a presence for peace and justice. Join us." And we're asking y'all to join us. It's an ongoing thing, and the more the merrier. If you want to make yourself a sign to hold, and you park in one of the parking lots, and you happen to march down past the businesses on the sidewalks of Main Street, holding that sign as you're going to the weekly peace vigil. Police and peace don't have a hell of a lot to do with each other, do they?
Well, they try to keep the peace.
So what kinds of things might you write on one of those signs?
Well, no war with Iran, or
No more wars.
yeah, no more wars. Dump the Trump or whatever.
Get out of Iraq, please. We need our people home. We need our people home from Iraq and Afghanistan and all the places where we are positioned where we do not need to be. We need to be home here in the United States.
And also, one of the long-standing principles internationally is you don't mess with other countries' internal politics. Their domestic stuff, you just have to let them work it out. If you remember at the end of the Iraq War, that was the excuse for leaving. I think that there were other reasons for leaving. It was pretty clear at the beginning of that war that, we weren't told, of course. We were told that, bin Laden was in Iraq, and of course he was responsible for 9/11. So ISIS and organizations in Iraq were responsible for 9/11. Of course, we found out more recently that that was a complete fabrication, and it was not true at all, and it was known. It's unclear how much it was known by Bush, whether that was factual or not, but it was clearly something that was put together in order to invade Iraq, and I have some views about why we did that. But when I say we, I don't really mean we. I don't want to say that I'm not responsible in any way for the terrible things that go on in this country. For instance, I'm obliged to continue to work in racist and sexist conditions, despite the fact that I'm a feminist, against and fights against racism and feminism and all the other isms of, oppression all the time, I still have to work in those systems. So I still have to hold them up and reinforce them, which is not a good thing. But at the same time, I understand this idea that you don't go and intervene in how other countries do their politics. So when I say we, I'm actually Canadian, and I don't know if I should say this on the air, but I'm a green card holder. I'm not a citizen. I'm a citizen of the United Kingdom and of Canada. So my only voice is this. You have to vote, because I cannot do that. I cannot do that. So when I say we, it's not really quite correct. So I could just start saying you, but then you might feel, that I'm hurting your feelings. And
I mean, no matter what country you're from, if you're against war, you're with the we.
Right. Right. So the reason that was given then for withdrawing wasn't, we're tired of getting oil out of Iraq. The reason that was given was, we're done with the 9/11 stuff that we needed to do here, and we need to get out of the country now, and we cannot, because people said that's going to be so hard on the people of Iraq because there'll be chaos and they've already suffered enough. And the answer that was given was, it's not our job to manage other countries' domestic policy and domestic activities. We just can't do that. So that was why we left. Now the argument being given for this completely unprovoked assault on Iran is the people need us, because the leadership has been hard on the people. Many people have been murdered. Many people have been killed by the government. And in particular, the man who was killed in Iran is being blamed as if he was an evil military man. And if you think that war is evil, then every military person is evil, because every military person, much though I respect deeply the sacrifices that they make and the things that they go through in order to protect us, at the same time, you are agreeing to put yourself in a position where you may have to kill someone. And that's a very difficult position to be put in when you're killing at somebody else's order. And now you are killing at the order of someone who does not think things through, who himself and
Never
apparently
served.
his subsequent, his offspring. Apparently there's a terrible bone spur thing going on in his family, and none of them.
Hereditary.
So he's happy to send other people off to do the work that he doesn't have I think you know the word that goes there,
Patriotism.
to do himself. Now I was thinking more along,
Yeah, some
stones.
Yeah.
Courage.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right? He doesn't have, he's way too self-involved to put himself at risk, right? So you can use I'm not saying that we would expect politicians to be consistent in the things that they say, but to use that excuse now, we are going in to protect those people, is first off not at all anything to do with why this country or the president of this country, the head of the military in this country, has decided to go in. Do you want to talk about some of those reasons at some point?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Let's go in any direction we want to. The call-in studio number line is 208-892-9200 if you have anything cogent to contribute, and you can also you can comment on the KRFP website. We have a little post up there announcing this thing, and anything you have to say, we'll follow that. If you got any messages you want to send us, we'll read them on the air.
To add one point to what you said before we move away from it, but the interesting thing that I heard yesterday, I believe, was Pence came out in public and stated that there was a direct connection between 9/11 and Soleimani. So talk about beating a dead horse. How long is that story going to continue to come back and resurface as justification for an attack by drone or whatever and killing, which is ultimately not going to resolve or solve any of our problems on this planet, ever. It's never the answer. War is not the answer.
And I think Soleimani is a kind of sacrificial lamb here, because yes, he's military, and yes, he's a leader. So yes, he's engaged in, actions and led people and ordered people to do things. But at the same time, what has he actually done in this context? I mean, I'm not aware of any human rights violations that he's committed. Maybe I'm just wrong about that, but I'm not sure. Did you say earlier today there aren't any on the record that can be found at this
couldn't
point?
find anything, not directly. It's
Right.
more in a generalized, it was under his command that some Americans were killed.
Well,
in the
basically,
line of combat.
yeah, we've got the extrajudicial killing of of a foreign national in a third country, and then we get on the airwaves and we threaten that if you respond to this, we're going to give you even worse.
Yeah. And it's a bit complicated because prior to this time, the U.S. military drone use has primarily been aimed at the so-called war on terror. And because the war on terror isn't a war in a particular place, it kind of makes the whole planet a place where war can happen, which isn't typically how war has worked. Usually it's very situated, and it's two countries going head to head.
And what do the uniforms look like?
It's
They look like
impossible
what
to
you're
tell.
wearing, what
Right.
Leah's wearing, what I'm wearing. You know, so
Right.
that means we're all targets.
So if you take, it started with Bush, because in 2003, in October, Bush first authorized for drones to be used for military ends rather than simply for intel, for gathering information. And there's a story that doesn't seem to have much substantiation that in the mid-'80s, the Iranians weaponized drones, but it's not clear. There's so much controversy around that I'm not sure that that's the case. Nobody seems to have done that. No country seems to have done that until 2003. And the CIA had been pushing for this since early 2003. And as soon as 9/11 happened in September, the government decided that it was a good idea and instantly moved for it. So Bush was the first one. And he, put in new legislation. So he was immediately fighting the war on terror, which could be fought anywhere where you thought there was ISIS or someone who was an enemy of the state. So that's a weird wrinkle in war. That's a completely new thing, this war on terror concept. It's kind of a war without a war, or a war outside a war zone, which is not typically how you would consider the rules of war, the international humanitarian rules, or just war theory to apply. So one of the problems with the war on terror is it's not quite clear how to manage it in the international, international context. So what has Trump done now that's different? Well, first we have to understand that Bush, used drones then for the remainder of his career as the president of the United States. In his first term, Obama used 6 times as many drones. So in 4 years, he used 6 times as many drones as Bush had used in his entire time as president. 6 times. And Trump, in his first year, quadrupled that again. So that's 24 times the amount of drones that were originally used when they were weaponized. So it was a very rapid climb to, I don't want to say wanton, but I want to say for drones to become the go-to when you're fighting a war, which is a complete breach of proportionality because most countries don't have the capacity. It's not just that you need to make a drone, it's that you need to have a very complex and powerful satellite system that basically covers the whole planet to do drone warfare, unless you want to just do it locally, because you need to be able to connect up to the drone and communicate with it and tell it what to do. Maybe you could program it before you put it up in the air. That might be another option. But it means that most countries don't have, even if they have drones, and something like 49 countries have military drones now, they can't really do them much because Turtle Island is, after all, an island, and it's quite far from the Middle East. So basically, a behemoth like the United States, militarily speaking, can go to an area, set up a whole bunch of bases, but also have the capacity from the U.S. to send a drone. The U.S. has drones flying all over the world. That in itself is strange, to be flying armed drones over countries with which you are not at war is not a legitimate thing to do, but it's very handy because then you can deploy them whenever you need to deploy them. So Trump has done something now completely new. He is using drones to start another actual war that would be recognized as a war in international humanitarian law. This should be a problem for him, and I certainly hope to do my best to make it be a problem for him, because this means that he is bound by the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions and other documents and systems and mechanisms in international humanitarian law are for when you're in a state of war. This is why Guantanamo Bay was such a difficult thing, because the people who were there were not considered to be in a state of war, which meant that they shouldn't have been kept there because they weren't engaged in the war on terror officially. But if they weren't engaged in the war on terror, that means for them they have no protections under the Geneva Conventions, which made it a great place to do torture, because you take people for a reason and then have them be there under a different kind of an account, which means you are no longer bound by the Geneva Conventions. So it's a complex backdoor way. And when Obama was asked by, a 10-year-old school kid, what's the one thing you really regret about your time as president, his answer was that I didn't shut down Gitmo right off the bat when I could, that I didn't do that, because he knew that it was not going to happen now. And in fact, in a New Yorker interview, Trump was quoted in, I don't know if they interviewed him themselves, but he was quoted in a New Yorker report before he was even elected president saying that he was going to return torture and he was going to radically up it. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. They didn't know how awful it could be. So he reinstated torture. And the reason why torture was taken out largely by Obama, one I would hope all, but largely it would seem, or he intended to take it out, was because it's just ineffective. If you make people hurt so bad that they just will do anything to get you to stop, they lie. So it's a really bad way to get information, and it's a really bad way to get people to do things.
And we've proven in the past 3 years it doesn't take torture to get people to lie, because the president, nobody's torturing him.
Putting them in government helps too.
Yeah. Anyway, I got a few announcements to read right now before we continue. I will point out that I was just looking up while you were talking. I was looking up the cost of drones. How much do military drones cost? And there's your U.S.-made MQ-19 Reaper Predator B costs $15.9 million per unit. But then the one that Iran shot down was worth about $120 million. There's the MQ-4 Triton, which is $225 million. The Stingray MQ-25, $168.85 million. The RQ-4 Global Hawk, $122.77 million. The Fire Scout MQ-8, $46.25 million. The Reaper, which is $15.88 million, and the Predator C Avenger, $15 million. Now the Reaper is not for wheat or barley.
So when they first started using the Reaper, General Michael Mosley of the U.S. military said that it was such a powerful weapon that now drones could take on their true hunter-killer role. And that phrase, their true hunter-killer role, just makes me go cold.
Okay. All right, a couple of announcements. The first transgender suicide hotline is now up and running in the USA. You can reach the Trans Lifeline at 877-565-8860. That's 877-565-8860. We're here with Patricia Glazebrook and Rhea Davis, and we are discussing what a fix we're in with a president who seems to have no internal controls or external controls on what he says and does. I've never seen this before. He has no speechwriters, or if he does, he doesn't follow what they write. And you know when he's using a speechwriter because it doesn't sound like him. The interesting thing, I pulled up an interview from David Letterman, 1986, with Donald Trump. And he's talking then, but, seemingly in more, his demeanor was less crazed like we've observing now, but the same issues that he's been pushing now that have done us so much damage. He was talking about these things then, so he really hasn't changed. But now that he's got power, the power is, there's that arrogance of power. He was just a businessman. Oh no, I'm not going to run for president. Like hell, he wouldn't.
Nobody thought it could happen. I don't think. I was also shocked when Boris Johnson got voted in by such a landslide. It's crazy. What is going on? My theory is that there's lead in the water pipes. But also, I don't think that. I think that Trump is impulsive. I think that he's nasty. I think that he's unrealistic. I think that he's a spoiled 5-year-old. But I don't think that...
And those are his good qualities.
Those are his best qualities. Yes, that's right. But I don't think he's as stupid as he likes us to think. So those tweets, I mean, just picture in your mind now how much time you spent thinking about or talking about when he couldn't spell the word coffee.
Mm-hmm.
All that time, you could have been thinking about what he's doing to manipulate global politics. You could be thinking about, how is this just a cover for strategy? I mean, I think it's part of his long-term strategy to appear to be an idiot, when in fact he
The court
has
jester
a plan.
as king, and
Yeah.
it's an act.
I think he has a long
Yeah.
game, and I think that his long game goes beyond being president. I think his long game as president is to make his and his family's situation absolutely one of the best situations in the world, so that they can ride out climate change and so that they can spend, the rest of their lives in luxury while we starve, because climate change is basically eating out the human population, as it has done with other species, from the bottom up, the bottom being the most vulnerable, by which I mean sub-Saharan Africa and also places in Asia where climate change is making it hard to grow food, where it's forcing migration, where it's destroying people's lives in so many different, kinds of ways. So I think that the best way to deal with climate change, if you can now, is amass as much wealth as you can, because as things get worse and worse and worse, you'll be the one who can still afford to buy food. You'll be the one who can still afford to buy protection as you live in your mansion somewhere while the rest of the planet goes down. I think that's his end game. When it comes to being president, then, his end game is not to serve the American people or to further the interests of the United States. It's to promote that program that is his personal program for him and his family. And that may sound like an absurd...
He may not be the only one involved in this.
Well, I think there's quite a lot of them. And I think that they're totally enabled by that decision that was made in, about... what's the phrase I'm looking for? The one about funding. Sorry, it's been...
Well, okay, we're talking about, the decision that said
really-
that money equals free speech, and you cannot...
Citizens United.
And corporations are persons
Yeah.
under the law, therefore you cannot
Yeah.
restrict the free speech of...
I'm talking about Citizens United that
Yes.
enables also
Exactly.
enables corporations to pay people off. And I'm sure that there was previously these different kinds of incentives, let's just call them, but really they were bribes. But that's rampant since Citizens United was, just since that case, a decision came out on that case.
Well, it's the unaccounted for and unpublished money that goes into the super PACs that don't have to reveal who because they're issue advocates,
Right.
Which are
allegedly.
funded by the fossil fuel industries and all of the other
Yeah.
corrupt corporations that are really behind it all. My
And
opinion.
there's a whole historical account of the collapse of the euro-dollar market and how oil took over being the underpinning of global economics. It then fell to oil. And there's also really good arguments that really was what happened in the first invasion of Iraq. Sure, Halliburton wanted to get in there, keeping in mind that Dick Cheney, who was vice president at the time, gave up his job as CEO of Halliburton Oil in order to become vice president of the country. And so quickly, it's amazing how wonderfully fast they can act when they want. Very soon after Iraq was invaded, Halliburton was in there, sucking up the oil. So it kind of all connects together. But there's actually argument from, CIA and ex-CIA people that I've spoken with that the real purpose was that a giant oil deal was made. So the euro-dollar market was basically underpinned national economics through gold, and the gold was held in Fort Knox. So basically there was a guarantee that every American dollar could be exchanged for gold. Well, when there wasn't enough gold to cover how many American dollars there were anymore, that system of having, you need a fixed point to pin down. If I'm in England and I want to change my British pounds to Ghanaian cedis or, another kind of currency, then you kind of need a point that fixes all these possible different exchanges that can happen, and the euro-dollar market did that. So once it couldn't do that anymore, it was oil that was doing that. And then this big oil deal was made that didn't actually go through U.S. channels. And so basically the invasion of Iraq and what happened earlier in Kuwait, what happened in Kuwait, were a response to the fact that the American government felt that it was losing control of global economics because it was losing control of oil exchanges.
There's been a couple of times, Saddam was going to go off of the dollar for dealing with oil. Libya was planning to do the same thing. They were planning on doing, cutting the United States out of it.
Right.
In which case, then the dollar would be floating freely.
And also, not to have control of the oil economy is not to have control of the global economy. Right. So, yeah.
So, I wonder how many people out there that might be of my vintage. I was born in 1949. I was in high school, junior high, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. There were articles in the Popular Mechanics, How to Build Your Family Fallout Shelter, and seriously ethical discussions in that magazine about whether, when you've taken care of your family, you got all your supplies to survive the nuclear war and the fallout, and your neighbor who didn't is trying to break in your shelter, is it okay to shoot him? And that was being seriously asked. As a result, many people of my vintage didn't see that it was safe to bring children into the world, and I didn't. It was, and I'm having flashbacks to this now, to that one now. The utter craziness. I mean, we came very close in the Cuban Missile Crisis time. There was a submarine off the coast of the United States that had lost contact with Moscow, and some communication snafu, and they theorized that maybe they couldn't reach Moscow because Moscow had been destroyed in a nuclear exchange, and if that was the case, then they should be firing their nukes, and it required 3 people to decide assent to this, and one man whose name was Vasily Archipov said no, and that's why we're here talking today, because that was, there we go, Dr. Strangelove, the ending where the fellow's riding the bomb, yeehaw, well.
And interestingly enough, here we are today with people who are wealthy enough to have bunkers, and they're hiding out down there just waiting for it to happen, which, is either here nor there, but...
Well, government officials have a place to hide.
Right.
That's all dug out of mountains in Virginia.
But once you've destroyed the planet,
what is there
to come up for when the air is clear, if it ever becomes clear again? And that's the whole point, I think, is that before we get to that point, let's save the planet and save the people and what's left of what we have to save before it's too late.
No one wins a war.
No
one wins. Yeah,
we keep doing this.
But he keeps saying we're winning, but we're winning nothing.
Yeah.
Except a bad reputation, and people in another country saying death to America.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things that I'd like to raise then is, there's 2 points I want to make about it. And this is the question of Trump not consulting Congress. So the 2003 War Powers Act actually doesn't require that he consults them beforehand. It requires that he consults Congress within 48 hours of initiating, basically mobilizing troops is what it is. It's when you send the people, he has 24 hours or 48 hours then to take that up with Congress. And then Congress can decide to declare a war in the end. Congress has to actually declare it. So that's an interesting turn of events, because thanks to Nancy Pelosi, who I'm so relieved every morning when I wake up and see what's going on, I go, at least there's Nancy. She can do something about it, and she has on this because she's made demands that they follow this legislation because it's actual legislation, and the president of the country should be bound by it, especially when it's, you know, the possibility of creating a world war. So there's 48 hours to get Congress's approval, which is clearly passed, and if they don't get the approval, and I'm not sure if even if they do, the maximum length of time that those troops can be deployed outside the country in a conflict is 60 days. So as far as I can see right now, he has about 55 days to deploy his military that he's now been taking to the Middle East before he's going to have to bring them back. And will there be a declaration of war? Well, he's put himself in this perfect situation. He just did this one thing. He just took out one person. Other people were killed as collateral damage, but that was what he did. And that was an incredibly strategic move for two reasons. See, this is not a stupid man in lots of ways. He just likes to pretend he's stupid so that we laugh and get distracted from what he's, you know, what he's really doing. So he has put himself in a position now where he can just sit there, and Congress has to look like they started the war. So he's taken responsibility for whatever happens in the near future with potentially long-term consequences off his own shoulders, and he's put them on either Congress's shoulders or how is Iran actually going to respond to this? So that's the first point, is the point about this responsibility issue, which is a game that he's played very well at this point. The second issue is in July, on July 20th, Iran took a U.S. drone down from the sky. And they did that because they said it was flying too close and breaching in their territory. And there's a big dispute about that. They say it was very close to the shore. The U.S. administration says it was at least 12 miles outside, so it wasn't actually in territory that the Iranians owned and should have been able to shoot it down with, etc. So when they took that down, he immediately mobilized a response. Trump mobilized a response.
Yes.
So he had
Okay. I'll put you on. Who's this?
we've got a question coming in, caller coming in, so I'm going to tell you the rest of that story after.
All right, we've got, can you hear us, Cass? Hello?
How's it going?
Oh, pretty good.
It sounds kind of like I'm overmodulating a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll do these things, I guess.
Oh yeah. So the basic gist of what I want to say is, over and over again, we in these wars we tend to refer to ourselves as we, the United States.
Yeah.
Each one of us individually as part of that collective whole, and I want to suggest that we quit that behavior because we somehow seem to be telling everybody in the world that we live in a democracy and that all of us are calling the shot collectively. And that is not happening here. We've lived in a delusional democracy at best for the last 50 years. And this concept of we, me, you, your guests, we aren't droning people. We're not responsible for that. So I think the whole world needs to be told the story about the truth of the American myth of democracy. We're obviously controlled by money. Our candidates who are elected are controlled by money. The media that helps elect them is controlled by their money. Everything from head to toe, it isn't a democracy. We are not electing these people. The American citizenry is not responsible for the war machine that has been running around in circles. And while we're on that topic, one of the Project Censored says was one of the most censored news items is the fact that the military, the American military-industrial complex, is the number one.
Yeah, speak up a little louder there.
That the military-industrial complex is the number one emitter of carbon on the planet. They're the number one consumer of petroleum products, and they're number one user of petroleum products. And every time we've been having these wars lately, it's for more petroleum products to continue to feed this machine that we have no control over. And until we start using language that acknowledges that it is not a democracy that has put this military-industrial madness machine in power, I didn't do it. I'm not responsible for that, and I don't like the we being used all the time. I'm sorry, I was born in the USA, but I have nothing to do with this mighty military-industrial complex. If anything, I'm willing to put my body on the line and do civil disobedience as your guests are, but I think we should watch the we, because we aren't part of this government. This government is controlled by a private sector and by a large military-industrial complex that has nothing to do with the you and me's. They control the media, and the media keeps trying to tell us that it's all of us, but it isn't. So that's my comment.
Okay, well, good. We'll continue on then. That was Cass Davis, who's the vice chairman of Radio Free Moscow.
Can I ask him a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your comments. We couldn't hear all of them early on, but what I did hear, everything that you've said is absolutely correct there. I think that also, Cambridge Analytica is a new step in the absolute loss of democracy, because it made so absolutely clear how democracy is something that can be completely torn down if you can just fund the right data gatherers, and it's a big issue, in data ethics and how our ethics gets used. And I think that Facebook should be held responsible for its selling, I gather, the data that made that possible, and it also has destroyed, democracy in Great Britain. But of course, democracy was already so much under threat before that. The question that I want to just ask you to comment on, if you don't mind commenting further, is, do you think it's possible to get democracy back?
Oh, I think our caller had hung up. So,
sorry. Maybe other people.
Well, maybe, yeah. Can we get democracy back? I can weigh on this. Here is we have democracy happening right here. KRFP is democracy at its best. It started with no corporate sponsorship. It was a group of community human beings that wanted to have something different and a broader form of radio than what we get from commercial radio. And we've been on the air for 14 years now, or 15, yeah. Yes. Okay, hold on. We'll get you back on.
So to answer the question she kind of addressed to me to come back to, is we can get democracy back, but we have to not be so lazy. People have to be willing to actually talk about issues and not just be happy with their little soundbite they learn from their pundit. They actually have to listen to each other, understand issues. We have to actually look it in the face, and when it isn't democratic, we have to tell everybody, no, this is not a democracy. This is a bunch of white male dudes in Washington, D.C. who are hooked to oligarchies and oiligarchies. We have to not let them spin everything the way it is. We have to take control of our own media, as though me and you and others in our community have done with having our own radio station. But the number one thing is the new warfare of these times is mental warfare, and we have to stay on top of this psychological warfare, them trying to redefine terms, changing, pretty soon violence will mean giving a flower to your friend. It's all Orwellian twist of everything. No term means anything anymore. We're all afraid to argue with each other. Nothing changes without conflict. So we need to be able to do that. I found that even in progressive circles, even places like when I worked at the Moscow Food Co-op, people are so defensive of what they've already learned. They're not willing to listen to anybody else's reality. That's anti-democratic. And it happens in progressive circles. It isn't just this demon that is started by a right-wing top fat cats. They have affected the media. There is what's called social engineering and this exceptionalism, this thing of saying because we're progressive left-wingers, our rhetoric isn't just rhetoric, it's facts. And, you know, it's not. That isn't what's called critical media literacy skills. And we need to start analyzing things and digging through and seeing what passive-aggressive traits that people are using to manipulate us. I mean, it's a bigger picture than just saying we're going to come back to voting. Democracy has never been just about going down to the voting booth either. It's a lot of civic responsibility and the laziness that the average American has when it comes to wanting to involve themselves in any way, shape, or form. To be civically involved is shameful. They think all they have to do is go to the voting booth every 4 years and wave a flag and they got a democracy. That's how we've gotten where we are. We're going to have to quit being so lazy. We're going to have to start examining issues, and we're going to have to go do things rather than just waiting for that one day to vote. And a lot of that's going to be we're going to have to look across each other at a table and agree to disagree, even though we're both considered ourselves lefties or what have you. I know that the Democratic Party, I consider myself left, but for the most part, those people do not represent me, and I don't think they're using critical media literacy skills. They're going to the voting booth and waving a flag. So are we ever going to get...
I think that's right. I wonder, though, I mean, it seems that there's an elephant in the room. We've talked about climate a bit. We've talked about conflict. You've talked about, democracy, people's apathy or difficulty or whatever it is that stops them from really participating in democracy other than just going out to vote. But the thing that seems to be missing from the account is the place of capital in all of this, because capital is really what's driving the way that the government operates now, given that most of the government seems to be getting payments to represent particular views that aren't the views that are in the best interest of the country or the people. For instance, supporting fossil fuel industries or supporting building and selling of, weapons. I mean, how many of the weapons that will be used in the next, year will be weapons that were built in the U.S., but not now being used by the U.S.? They'll be getting used by Iran and Iraq because, those are places where American weapons have been sold. And what about the question of labor? Because I think that, people aren't just lazy. I don't think that people are just apathetic. I think that we're all bloody exhausted. We are running around as fast as we can to have 3 part-time jobs because we're a single mother. And I'm not talking about, I'm a professor, so I kind of have a different kind of situation, but the unemployment rate is low in the country now. Well, that's the people who have the jobs often have 3 of them, right? Because they can't afford to live off the wage that they're getting for one of those jobs. So people are completely burned out and tired. It has put us in this context where it's easier to get people to vote on The Voice than it is to get them to go out and vote on politics. They're just exhausted. But the truth is that climate change and labor issues and war issues and the whole military-industrial, complex, the real problems that the world is facing now are problems that come about because of how, capital factors into connecting all of these things together that have disempowered the people by making it very difficult, if not impossible, for people to actually engage. I mean, who's not exhausted at the end of the day? Do you have time if you're working, jobs? If you're employed, do you have time at the end of the day to do the analysis, to read the things that you need to read, to watch, listen to or watch Democracy Now!, to listen to a radio station? Do you actually have time to do that at the end of your day? And I mean, the challenge here is that it's a whole package And how do you deal with a whole package? Because it's like, whack-a-mole, right? Every time you deal with one factor, another factor pops up. The key is we have to figure out what is the thing that holds that package together. And I'm suggesting that it's capital. And I think that we can change that. We can't get rid of capital. We're kind of stuck with it at this point. But we don't have to have capital work the way that it works now. Now it works in the U.S., which is the, Class A1 typical situation of capital at its most extreme and its best, which is to say its worst. What capital does is it says you're lazy, people are lazy and people are greedy. I don't think that either of those things are true. It also says the purpose of human life is the individual accumulation of private wealth. It says I'm an economic system, and that's what people should do in their lives, is they should participate in the great economic feast and collect private wealth. What if you look at other models of capital in Northern European states, for example, or in other places where capital doesn't function as an economic system? I mean, it also does that, but it primarily functions as a system for structuring society. And if you can change capital from inside, because thank you, Marx, much though I adore you, except for a couple of things, the revolution's not going to happen like that. It doesn't happen by some giant explosion. It happens because over one generation, you change how people think. And if you can change them to think that the purpose of human life is opening spaces for thriving, whether they're human thriving, ecosystem thriving, other lives thriving, whatever it is, atmospheric thriving, right? If we can transition capital, then all of those things are addressed at once. And it is possible to do that, but it requires real change, and it requires politicians that aren't driven by capital. And I think at this point, this country has those politicians. I'm thinking about AOC. I'm thinking about people who want the new Green Deal. I'm thinking about the fact, if you look at the constitution of sorry, bad word to use in the context of politics, if you look at the membership now in Congress as to what it was before 2018 and what it became in 2018, you see so much more diversity. You see so many other perspectives. And that's not to say that everybody who, is whatever color or race or where they're from or etc. It's not to say that everybody is, is ethical or so much respects justice as everyone else. But you have a massive group of diversity there that has got voices that speak for a kind of justice. And I think the best thing we can do is our best to empower them and educate the people that are around us that are just trying to, have their head in the dirt like an ostrich, who are just trying to hide from the reality that they're facing, because it's an overwhelming reality. I do outreach at high schools. I do it down to grade, the K-12 down to kindergarten students. I talk to them about climate change. It's a different conversation depending on how old they are. But when I ask those high school students, so what do you think are the important issues you need to address right now? They just look at me and I ask them, how tired are you of this? Are you overwhelmed by it? And they're completely overwhelmed by it. So I think that it's not just enough to say that we have to wait for the children to fix things for us. We need to get in there and, we can't say, oh, sorry, we messed it up, now you fix it. We really need to be out there working, moving towards fixing it. Sorry, that was longer than I...
Oh, that's all right. We got a couple of station chores to do here. 25 seconds of this, and then we'll get right back to it. Are you still there, Cass?
Yeah.
Okay.
KRFP, Moscow.
And you're listening to Fiddlin' Big Owl's Old-Time Liberal Revival and Barn Dance and Peace March. We've added that to our moniker for a while. As long as I can say it smoothly, we'll be fine. While we were talking about drones and the price of drones, the interesting thing, I pulled up, what they cost, and then actually who makes them. And there are four companies that make them. And do I have that still up? Yeah. Okay. No, I guess I don't. There's 4 military companies that make them. Recently, Congress passed a huge military budget. This all goes to these things. Every time these things get fired off. I really think that the president is also playing a game where he telegraphs these actions to some of his cronies that are invested in Wall Street, and they're short selling or buying stocks based on the tips. If you belong to Mar-a-Lago and he goes there on golf and he says, oh, incidentally, we got some big news that's going to happen here. and you go off and you buy your futures contract, and a couple days later you cash in big. Of course, you've got plenty of money to contribute to that wonderful man that gave you that wonderful insider tip before he sent the drone strike, and now you're positioned to make some big bucks. That's what it's all about, after all, isn't it?
Speaking of capital, what was the first order of the day of business when he took office was to allow that huge tax cut for the rich and his people. And it's what has continued to inspire and I think inflate their support for the president, who has given them what they are after.
I write on oil in the Niger Delta. I write on genocide in Sudan. I have never encountered corruption like I've seen since I've lived in this country. I know that's a shock to the U.S., but it's true.
I'm going to play us a little bit of music here. This is a song that I wrote a few years ago when I became concerned about the concept of the drone and the young person that might be sitting behind a laptop in a military installation. And he was selected for the military because he won a contest in a video game contest, and they gave him some stuff, and also he became high on their recruiting list, and now he's sitting somewhere in Colorado Springs, maybe, killing people over, and those folks are getting PTSD. Anyway, this one is called "All in the Name of Freedom." It was co-written with my friend Kelly Emo. And you can find it on YouTube. But here it is now. It's called All in the Name of Freedom.
Had a dream Sunday morning, sipping tea with the Lord above. I looked down on the earthly treasure. I saw rivers run with blood. I saw brothers killing brothers, and all the world in one strife. I saw cowards run for cover, and human rights to the night. And it's all in the name of freedom. Name of God, we am a guns. Emotions give no sway to reason. Now it's killing time just begun. Our leaders seem to lust for murder. One excuse is bombs away. Don't make a move, it's out of order. Or it could be a judgment day. Massive weapons of destruction, display for all to see and buy. An irresistible seduction. You gotta give this stuff a try. And it's all in the name of freedom. God, we sell our guns. Emotions give no sway to reason. Now it's killing time and just begun. So we all line up for the battle, and our righteous warrior God. Politicians prattle about faith and duty and fight for good, but when we look our gun sights. We might see another human face. We might fail to do our duty, so our gun sights have been replaced. Now we peer into a graphic screen and run a joystick game machine. But it's all too very real, and we never gotta face the ones we killed. And it's all in the name of freedom. In the name of God, we aim our guns. We want it all, lost our reason. Now it's killing time, it's just begun. And it's all in the name of freedom. In the name of God, we fire our guns. And it's all for a moral reason. One hand in oil, one stain in blood.
All right, that was All in the Name of Freedom. That was Kelly Emo on the vocals, and the guitar was Axel Krings, who's a professor here at U of I. And we have a professor from WSU here, Patricia Glazebrook, who has got a few things to say, which I want to hear.
Well,
Continue.
first off, I want to say thanks for writing this song, because you didn't credit yourself as the guy who wrote the song.
Oh, yeah, well, okay.
But also, I just want to, shout out to drone pilots, because there is this belief that it's like playing a video game. It's one of the concerns about drone warfare. And the truth is, most distance warriors, in other words, soldiers who kill from a distance, they do not have to engage the enemy. They do not have to see them. They do not have to see their families. But drone pilots are required, when they have taken a target down, to confirm that they have killed the target, which means that they have to, because remember, drones don't just drop bombs, they also have capacity for intelligence, so they can see. So the drone pilot in a bunker in, Nevada has to go to where the person was killed with the drone and see the impact that it has had. And they also see the impact of anyone else who was killed and who has collateral damage. This is very difficult for them to go through. But the other thing about being a drone pilot, do you remember that film Hurt Locker? They went out and did all their horrible things during the day, and then they went back to the bunker, to the barracks at night, and they drank a lot of alcohol, and they punched each other up, and they had this bonding solidarity moment where they got rid of all of their, well, not all, but they got rid of angst, and they got rid of all of the horrors or the emotional impacts of, sorry, I shouldn't be saying all, but they got rid of emotional impacts of what they went through during the day. If you're a drone pilot, you fire your drone, you see the mess that has made of a human life and usually human lives, and then you go home at the end of the day to your lovely partner and your beautiful children, and you still have everything that you just went through as a drone pilot in your brain. And so you have to live these cognitively dissonant two lives, where in one life you're dealing with this brutality, and in the other life you're dealing with Christmas stockings, and
you're nurturing life, and in the other you're dealing death.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's mentally virtually impossible to sustain that kind of cognitive dissonance that's so contradictory in the long term. So PTSD rates are actually higher amongst drone pilots than they are amongst others.
Well, they're on a base, but they probably had their families there. They go home every night.
Yeah.
And they got to deal in both worlds, in
Yeah.
in one consciousness. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And the other thing is, they are the last person to have their finger on the, button. And they are responsible for their drone strike. So once they've been told that they've got all the authorizations to make the strike, they then have an opportunity to say, I don't like the collateral damage estimate. So the CDE, the collateral damage estimate, is an estimate of how many people are in a range that puts them at, more than, I think it's 60% probability of being hurt or killed by the drone strike. So they can call for there to be a new collateral damage estimate, and that way stall actually making the strike if they think that it's going to put them in a position where they're not doing something legitimate, because rules of war require that you don't have unnecessary collateral damage. And so they have to make that call, which means that they're absolutely, they're ultimately the person who's responsible.
So where do we get to the border of the war crime?
The border of the war crime? You mean, when does it become a crime as opposed to...
Yeah, here's a person deciding whether they're going to do this, and they're responsible for pushing that button. Can they commit a war crime if they make a mistake?
Yes, they can. So they have to, use their conscience and decide if what they're doing is legitimate and just war theory and an international human, international
Do military folks get schooled in this in any serious manner, or are they just schooled to obey orders?
Well, the thing is, that's the whole point of it, is it's taking out the just obey orders and giving them the final right. So it looks like they're actually being empowered to be their own master and to make the right decision. But really what's happening is they are being made the fall guy. If it turns out that you accidentally hit a hospital, which has happened, it's like, it was next to the terrorist camp, but we thought it was the terrorist. Oops. Right? So you're responsible. I mean, when that happened, those people who were firing the drones were the ones who got discharged and, got tried for crimes against humanity in war, right? So it doesn't just give them
Have
autonomy.
there been any actual trials of drone pilots for things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's been a, they've been doing...
They don't publicize them much.
Well, because it's not exactly popular stuff, is it? Right?
No.
Like, people don't need to know the kinds of things. I mean, also the only reason that Obama released any information about drone strikes, like how many there had been, where they were, and how many people were killed, and how many were targets, and how many were just the guy delivering the pizza, or whatever, that stuff got released in 2016 only because the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, filed a lawsuit, and the judge decided that data had to be released because people needed to know. First off, we're financing the law, and I can say the war, and I can say we there, because even though I'm not a citizen, I still have to pay American taxes, which I hate having to pay now that they go to Trump so he can go to Mar-a-Lago and go to war.
Now, there was a young woman who exposed that...
Chelsea Manning?
No, that was another one. She's got a strange name, too. Weather or something. I don't know.
You mean exposed drone strike stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, because all that stuff a lot of it became public. Anything that wasn't going to compromise agents in the field, like CIA, spies, people who could get, suffer horrible deaths if their identity was uncovered. Other than information like that, it was all released. So it turned out before that, there were a couple of organizations, one in New York and one in London, that were gathering data on drone strikes. And they were doing it by looking in local newspapers, that are in the language of the people who are in the town or the city, etc. And sometimes they would do on the ground walk from house to house to ask in each house how many people in the house, in the family, were killed in the latest drone strike. So they collected all this data, and then Obama had all this data because he knew how many had killed, etc. So when it got released, and the data sets are not consistent, one's over 3 years, the other's over 4 years, etc. So I basically normalized the data as best as possible, and it worked out that there were about 2,500 people who at that point, up to the end of 2015, from when Obama started, so in those years, there were 2,500 people who'd been killed by drone strikes. And according to the U.S. administration, there were only something like 60 of them who weren't actual targets, who were collateral damage, and all the rest were actual targets. Well, according to these other sources, they also came up with that there were 2,500 people killed, roughly, but they came up with only 49 of them were actually targeted people, leaders that were targeted. And the rest were collateral damage. So there's this giant gap in the middle, right, where we can all agree that there were at least this many who were not military who were collateral damage, and at least that many who were military who were legitimate targets and were killed. And in the middle, the problem with the war on terror is you don't know who's an enemy and who's not an enemy, right, because they're not wearing a uniform. Right? So it's a very different kind of war, the war on terror. But if you go back now to, the collateral damage that has happened already because of the drone strike that happened in the airport in Iraq, the collateral damage there is once you go back to normal war where people are wearing uniforms and you can very easily identify who's a legitimate combatant, it's a lot harder to squeak out of, oh, but that was a lawful combatant. So what they do with drones now is they do what they call signature strikes. So one way to do it is you target someone. So you figure out that's a bad guy, and you get there was a process of authorizing it that Obama put in place, that it had to go through some committees and it would take 2 or 3 days, and then you would get the authorization. That's clearly a person who we need to take out because they're a leader in Al-Qaeda or a leader in ISIS or whatever. And so that was one way of doing it, was you identified them. And then when you came across the fact that the person was going to be in this place at that time, you could then, you already had the authorization that were an identified target. You just had to respect the actual ethics of the situation. Don't kill people unnecessary. Don't kill them if you can, capture them instead, etc. There were various rules for what you do in the actual event. Trump took all that away. Another thing that Obama did was he took the decision-making out of the hands of the CIA, because the CIA are kind of like the wolves and the people are kind of like the sheep. So you shouldn't really have the CIA deciding which of the sheep the wolves should eat, right? So Obama took it out of their hands, and instead it had to go through this committee to identify someone who would be a target. Trump got rid of that, and he just gave it straight back to them. So right now the CIA decides who the people, who the targets are and who they aren't. Although I think in, our case now of last week's attack, it was pretty clear that it was, he obviously had advice on who to take out where, but I think that it was Trump who gave the authorization from that. But the CIA clearly proposed it to him, or suggested that would be the right way to go about it. So it seems now that there will be a basis for holding Trump and the American military, and probably particular people within that, responsible for drone strikes that are happening now, because now it will not be easy to say they were a combatant if they're clearly not in a uniform and are not, are not a combatant. I lost a point in there.
All right. Well, this is clearly a very crucial time that we're in right now, and at this point in the next year of our history will be written whether we stepped up and did the right thing, or just allowed the decline, the moral, spiritual, economic decline of the United States and the Western alliances to occur. We're here with WSU Philosophy Professor Patricia Glazebrook, and with Rhea Davis, who's mostly silent, but you're taking it all in. You got anything to?
I want to cry.
Well, you can cry. The toilet paper's in the bathroom.
I have an observation, though.
Get really close, though.
I have an observation regarding the initial drone strike, and I believe that the lack of evidence and support of fact that has been withheld, I believe intentionally by the White House. I believe, and this is just my opinion, but my humble opinion says that this was a personal thing between Trump and Soleimani, and I believe that he really had no authority, no real reason or cause to go after and actually murder and assassinate the general of Iran.
Well, what I read in the paper was that his advisors gave him 4 choices, and they just threw that one in as like the really extreme one, so that maybe he would see the other ones as less extreme, and then to their surprise, that's the one he picked. Why didn't they stop him?
Wow.
Well, they were going at each other on Twitter as well, is what I found out just recently, which I did not know. I had no idea.
Who was going at each other?
Soleimani and Trump.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They were going back and forth, and there were all these memes and things that. There was this one that I saw that was of the White House being blown up behind Soleimani, and it was in response to a Game of Thrones back and forth between Trump and him right before he was taken out.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting pretty deep
Mm-hmm.
when you have wars that can be started or instigated
On Twitter.
by texts on social media. Now, suppose you were
Oh, and then
not that we would need an enemy of the United States to intervene, take over Trump's Twitter account, insult all kinds of world leaders, and start the war. I think he's perfectly capable of it. It's a do-it-yourself project.
But interestingly, Soleimani's Twitter account was killed, and he was removed from Twitter, but not Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right before he was assassinated.
Oh, so they shut him up, but they didn't shut Trump up.
And they took his Twitter account away.
Mm-hmm. Well, Twitter is does Zuckerberg own Twitter as well?
You know, I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it was Soleimani after that drone strike when Trump was ready to retaliate, and he had rockets in the air or jet fighters in the air and rockets on the ground aimed at a anti-airplane battery of I'm going incoherent here. There was a battery of anti-airplane missiles in Iran, and he said that he was going to take that out in revenge. That was what he was aiming at. He was eventually talked out of it by not the people immediately around him, his security advisors, because they seemed to be mostly given in. At this point, the people around him are people who are going to agree with him whatever he does, because all of the rest of the people have already been kicked out of the system. But the CIA persuaded him that it was in breach of international human law with respect to proportion. You don't, shoot, you don't kill flies with a rocket launcher, and you don't kill 140 people in a military area simply because you lost a drone, right? Lost a piece of equipment. It doesn't weigh well against human lives. But at that point, I believe it was Soleimani who actually said, when they were under threat, before the attack was, the retaliatory attack was cancelled, I believe it was Soleimani who said, if that happens, if they do that, then our target will be Tel Aviv. So earlier I asked a question about him telling Congress. He told Israel before he told Congress. And he told Israel because I think he was obliged to, because Tel Aviv and Israel would be the next target if Iran needs to respond. They don't have the capacity to send rockets as far as hitting us in the U.S. That doesn't mean they couldn't find ways to do it. Putin has made a suggestion about, hey, it'd be great to go back to Cuba. So let's hope that doesn't happen, because we don't need more Cuban missile crises.
How do we know that was even Soleimani on that Twitter account?
On the one that was supposed to be Soleimani's Twitter account? Yeah.
We don't know that.
Yeah, this was an official statement.
Picture.
It wasn't Twitter that he...
It was his personal account, according to all sources.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who knows, right?
Who knows? I mean,
yeah. Yeah, who knows, was trying to provoke that war. But I don't think that it's, I guess maybe I'm just an optimist, because it's nicer, happier being that way, right? I'm also a realist, but here's the reality of it. There are so many bases now for this to add, not to, Trump having to be, tried now that the impeachment process has decided that it should go forward, right? He needs to be sent to the International Criminal Court. I mean, he needs to be sent there already because of the massive humanitarian crisis for children and families that he has enacted.
Oh, but we withdrew from the world. We withdrew from the World Court in anticipation of the war crimes in this era, didn't we?
Well, yeah, and now he's perpetrating them, right? So we've already identified some. He had no basis for the drone strike in the first place. He certainly had no base for making it in a third country. He now can be tried for collateral damage, can be included, because I can't believe that all of that collateral damage is going to turn out to be absolutely necessary for the military action in question. And finally, he's now been saying, in the last 24 hours, he's been saying, do you really want the cultural heritage of, Iran and Iraq to get destroyed? well, destruction of cultural heritage is actually a category of genocide under the, you don't just kill the people, you kill all memory of the people and everything that they ever established as a culture and as a civilization. So just threatening that should be enough to report
that
into
is a
the
war crime.
IPCC.
Well,
it's a war crime.
The Iranian leader released a list of all the Trump properties worldwide. I think you'd probably be foolish if you were going to stay in any of those places in the near future. And that was a pretty clever thing to do. It's like, let's put this guy on edge. He only cares about dollars.
Yeah, hit him in the wallet. Absolutely. That is a good
where
strategy.
it counts.
Yeah. Another way of hitting people in the wallet, I've now pulled up here are the top 4 companies dominate the U.S. military UAV market. UAV mean, unarmed air vehicles, according to a study by market research firm Govini. It's General Atomics, Northrop Grumman, Textron, and Boeing, and they account for 66% of the $9 billion drone market. If you own any of those stocks, you are complicit. You are complicit in this. This is
part of the problem.
Part of the problem. If you are making any profits out of war, or the materials for war, or the equipment for war, you are part of this. Divest. Divest. Divest.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Get your hands out of the dirty business, and maybe we'll forgive you.
So unmanned aerial vehicle,
yeah.
UAV, yeah. Mm-hmm. So then the big problem now for Israel is actually from next door, from Lebanon, because Hezbollah was established in Lebanon in 1985, and it was supported, and Iranian followers of Khomeini supported the setting up of this. It has a political wing and it has a military wing. And their mission in 1985, as stated, and the only part of their mission that they retained when they revised their manifesto, as it's known more recently, the only one that they retained, they got rid of a lot of the religious rhetoric and a lot of the language that was problematic. But initially, the main goal was to get Israel's land back and to get Israelis and Americans out of the country. And that point, the word that was used was obliterate, to obliterate the Israelis and take the land over again. So Hezbollah has been parked in Lebanon for quite a long time now, and if Iran wants to move on Israel, that's probably where it's going to come from. And I completely support the Palestinians. I support the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights statement that the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians constitutes war crimes for which they should be answerable to the International Criminal Court. But at the same time, I know lots of Israelis who do not support the way that Palestine is being treated, and the Israeli government has a lot to answer for its treatment of the Palestinians. So I absolutely support the Palestinians, but at the same time, I support that it would be a very bad thing for Hezbollah to launch its horror, its terror, its revenge and hatred on the Israelis because of something that has been done by a president who's safely ensconced on the other side of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, with all the security in the world. And somebody posted up a map with a Sharpie circling Palm Beach and said, "Pissed Iran. He's on the golf course."
I saw that.
Yeah.
It's a pretty strange, I grew up, I was in 9th grade when Kennedy was assassinated. That was like a horrendous, traumatic event. And here, we're idly speculating, maybe Iran will kill him on the golf course. It's like, what a change.
Yeah.
And I don't think the change was in my heart. I think it was in the external circumstances that are there. It's like now, mourning the death of a president, and now, gee, maybe there'll be a presidential suicide in the White House.
He'll hang himself.
I'd
Yeah.
settle for resignation.
Yeah,
Resign.
go play golf.
No, I'd settle for, incarceration. I'm
That
settling
would
for
be
resign
okay,
on this
too.
guy. This guy needs to be held accountable for the stuff that he's done.
Absolutely.
How many lives has he destroyed,
In one of the prison for profits that he is so fond of, him
Yeah.
and his people.
Yeah, so he's destroyed lives at the border. He's destroyed lives by getting rid of, people's access to health care. I mean, getting rid of school lunches. The people around him as well. I think that they need to be prosecuted for crimes against humanity.
I was just going to add that before I forget that the some of the problem for the asylum seekers who have rushed the border, tried to seek asylum here in this country, and now are being deported back to Guatemala and some of the war-torn zones. The reason on a majority level for these people to flee and seek asylum here in the United States is in part due to the environmental impact of climate change and what it's done to their part of the world, which is ironic in the sense that they are coming here seeking asylum and they're sent back to where they came from and being blamed for it, while the White House sits back and cages children, separating families at the border. And who knows what has happened to them? Why is that acceptable? And isn't that a crime against humanity?
Absolutely, because a
That he
large
could-
number of
he
them
could
report
and should
sexual
be
abuse, right?
Indicted for. It's genocide.
Yeah.
There, if we were at war with Mexico, the situation at the border would be a war crime.
Yeah, but it can be a crime against humanity without being a war crime.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I really wanted to just raise one other issue, and that was to just answer the question, well, why is he doing this in the end then? Why did he decide to kill Soleimani, and why was he given a list of 4 to choose from? I mean, I think we need to fight back against the idea that Soleimani is the evil person that he's going to be made out to be, because that's a typical strategy in war, is you demonize the enemy, and I think that's part of the justification for killing him, and we shouldn't put up with that. But we should ask, why then is it actually happening? And I think that there's a main reason and there's a benefit, and I think the main reason is to just do an oil grab. I think it's exactly
Absolutely.
it's that simple. And I think that the other thing is, what is it going to mean then for the November election? Because the impeachment process and the trial that he would be subject to because of that could very easily be delayed if he creates this great war, this giant war. By great, I mean giant there. The consequences to the impeachment process, his trial process, and to whether or not it will be possible to have an election is, could be giant, right? Because he spoke from the early days about what it might mean to just be president forever. And there's also...
And he means it.
Right? And there's been conversations about there being a third term already, right? And... if you create a state of emergency, usually countries don't have elections during a state of emergency. And that was really what Hitler did. He came to power as chancellor, and then he invaded Poland and created a war situation. And as soon as they were in war, they couldn't hold another election. So I think the main goal is the oil to help him get rich, but then I think he's going to hold on to the position as long as possible. And also I think the long game, I mean, think about the people you remember from history, right? You don't remember someone who decided not to cross the Rubicon. You remember Julius Caesar, who went on and conquered a whole bunch of countries, right? It's the warriors. It's the nasty people who we remember. And I think Trump wants to be someone who's remembered in history. I think he wants to be the guy who, like Hitler built Nuremberg because he wanted to set this stuff up. So it was a bit of an Ozymandias, but he wanted to have it that people could know he was there because he made his mark. So they deliberately dismantled it and held the trials in Nuremberg in consequence of that. But I think that Trump would be perfectly happy to be remembered for all human eternity, which may only be 100 years now, of course. But, he would look forward to that. that, and he doesn't really care how ruthless he has to be to get that. So he's got personal motivations, wealth, being remembered in history, and not having to, be tried because of the impeachment business.
Oh, how
And he
many?
was actually put in office by the oil industry, and what he's done since then is for them again and again and again.
Well, when I came back from Standing Rock on Election Day and then woke up the next morning to the result that we got, everybody that was there protesting that pipeline knew that when the hand came off the Bible in January that everything was going to change, which it did. I wouldn't say that Obama did anything better. He did some administrative things. He didn't take any real action. And in fact, there were 2 times when I was there when some sort of victory would be declared. Now y'all can go home. Oh yeah, the Corps of Engineers said they're not issuing the permit, and then oh yeah, we won, and people would leave. But those were just
Temporary stays.
temporary things. It didn't mean anything.
Well, no, that's because Trump came on, and one of the first things, like in his first week in office in January
The executive order.
17, he made that executive order to close down. So Obama actually made the Corps of Engineers do a second impact assessment, which was when they decided that it was stupid to put it under Lake Oahu because if it broke, it would be impossible to fix it. And that got knocked away, so it went under there. There's been multiple breaks in the pipeline.
Not under the lake per se,
but
but
close.
close.
And throughout the system in other places. And Obama also appointed a joint commission that had a whole bunch of groups of different, like the different offices in government had to come together and had to work out a plan for greater incorporation of indigenous voices. And Trump got rid of that. So I think Obama actually made some really reasonable actions in response to it, and that they got thrown away by Trump. So, sorry.
Well, that was an experience that I will never forget, and I would do it again, even even knowing how it came, how it might come out, because you never know. You flip the coin, and maybe something happens. So,
and it's been criminalized in several states at this point too.
So anyway, we're gonna flip the coin in town here. I'm gonna read about the peace vigil once again. Where did I put that paper? Well, I know that by heart. There's been a peace vigil happening in Friendship Square in Moscow since November of 2001, and if you remember, September was also in 2001, and there was a day called the 11th of September where I woke up in the morning, flipped on the TV, and saw that an airplane had hit the World Trade Center, and I'm watching there and making the coffee, and all of a sudden, there on live TV, the second plane hits. I called upstairs to my wife at the time. We're at war. You better get up. Come on down and have some coffee. We're at war. And that was instant change of the world right there. Our thoughts about, the supposed safety that we have here. Well, it's proven that we're not safe, and that the United States may be held physically accountable for some of its actions. We're not invulnerable anymore, and as time goes on, we will be more and more vulnerable. So we better clean up our act and live up to the ideals stated in our founding documents. Of course, back then, all men are created equal. That left all of y'all out, and it left the natives out, the slaves. Slaves were counted a little bit. They were like 3/5 of a person, or whatever. So. We the people, yeah, and it says we the people, and if you take that seriously, you are responsible for everything that's going on, and if you choose to hide from it and not accept your responsibility for speaking out and changing things. So one of the ways you can speak out is show up in Friendship Square with whatever sign expresses your feelings about this current situation and our devotion to energy extraction, climate destruction, anything to make money. I recall we said earlier that the military was the biggest polluter, the largest user of oil. So what we're looking at is we've got a vicious killing machine that in its lust for killing is going to destroy the ability for life to continue on this planet, human life anyway. They say that after the bombs fall, the cockroaches will probably survive.
Yeah. That's what's happened in past extinctions.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So
There's been 5 already.
Are we the cockroaches from the last one?
We're just cockroaches. We're not, you know. Yeah, they did well. I mean, other things survived as well, right? And there was a lot of evolving since the last one, but yeah, there's always some species that survives really well.
Well, if we don't get out of this alive, they'll say, you know, Earth will regenerate life. It may not look like us. That's okay.
Hopefully it won't think like us. It
Yeah.
won't develop in military-industrial
Can
complex.
I do one more PSA for
You certainly can, yes.
Okay,
Speak.
so one more time for that call to call your representatives if you feel that perhaps our planet and our people here in this country would be safer without certain people in the White House. You might want to call so that we can get a fair Senate hearing and trial going there. Call 202-224-3121 and ask or demand that witnesses for a fair Senate trial can go forth, and that we want no more wars.
And that we will hold you responsible for your actions or inactions in this regard. I have, written and called, and you get this generic letter, thank you for expressing your concerns. They will not deal with your concern. They'll say, thank you for expressing it. I think they're taking statistics and counting votes. And of course, the stats of all the people complaining are weighed against the incoming checks from the from the folks that own our politicians and make continual payments to make sure that everybody keeps their mind right and votes correctly when it comes down to it.
Is there time for one quick note?
Oh, yeah, we're good.
Okay, so one quick note regarding how important it is to maybe have a fair Senate trial is that in the process of all of that, there could be enough or sufficient evidence to subpoena the server in the White House, a secret server. Because if you think that perhaps the only incidents of abuse of power was in connection to
Ukraine.
Ukraine, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Then I think again, because I think that was probably just one of many times that could be discovered on that server. That would be an interesting development and piece of evidence going forward to get our democracy back.
Yes, that's. I'm looking for another song I wrote. Maybe it's here.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank you for hosting us. It's really nice to have opportunity to get some of this information out and express some of these views. So thank you so much.
Well, that's
more than that, I want to thank Professor, you for coming forward and taking time out of your life to come and speak, because it's invaluable to hear from people like yourself for what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, it's a matter of life and death, so we have no choice
is.
but to speak out. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for making it possible, KRFP.
Well,
and
KRFP
Al
is a valuable community resource. Where else can you tune in and hear a conversation like this? Well, maybe occasionally you hear something on NPR that might approach this, or on Pacifica or whatever. But KRFP is well. I live in Moscow because of KRFP. I've been on the air 14 years, and I didn't plan to be here this long. I just planned to be on the radio for a little bit and have some fun, and oh boy, look what happens.
I think there's a vortex in Moscow.
Yeah, something like that.
The Palouse Triangle.
Really.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna play this. This is Izzy Kamakakawoli.
dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like lemon drops, high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dream that you did to, oh why can't I? Well, I see trees of green and red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and I see clouds of white and the brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by.
This is Roland Joe, and this is KRFP Moscow.